Here at a Fox Business Alert on Cavuto Coast to Coast. I'm Connell. Mcshane filling in for Neal, and the market continues to run higher here, especially with the Dow looking to close out at all-time highs for the year. Apple, Microsoft, and Visa have been among the top performers for the year. Only Microsoft down a little bit of the three today. The S&P 500 delivering more than 50% return since President Trump's election, which is actually more than double the average of past presidents 3 years in. So we'll talk about the politics heading into 2020 a little bit as the American Institute for Economic Research president Edward Stringham joins us today alongside Democratic strategist Laura Fink and Great America Alliance co-chairman Eric Beach, all three here. Welcome to our panel for the hour. So I don't know what I've almost run out of things to say about the market, right? It's like other than can this run continue that we've been on? You know? Well,
there's been a lot of promises. Deregulation of the economy. The president delivered on that.
Right.
Tax cuts, lowering of corporate tax rates. That has clearly been good for American business. A lot of people, I know a lot of businesses were a little bit afraid, upset about the trade wars. And now there's a bit of tempering of that. And now business can actually do what they want to do, engage in commerce. And I think people are happy. Markets are happy. Corporations are happy. Everybody's happy with that.
Is there another side to that, Laura? I mean, I saw it in the last Democratic debate where some thought it was a slip-up for the former Vice President Joe Biden when he was asked about the economy and started to talk about areas that weren't as strong in his view and said something to the effect of, people don't like this economy. Is that the way the Democrats argue it, or you just change the subject and talk about something else because things are so strong?
The reality is, everybody's got to have their pom-poms out because President Trump has a 44% approval rating, which is not good with this economy. And so that's the challenge.
That is an interesting point. You could argue it should be higher, right? We've talked about this before.
Any other presidential contender and incumbent would be like Democrat or Republican would be running away. Reagan won 49 states when he had a similarly strong economy. President Trump is talking about squeaking by. So I think people aren't translating that into giving him credit for that, which is why you hear a lot of people with their cheerleading pom-poms out saying that he should be. But the American people aren't feeling that. And I think that's what Joe Biden was talking about.
Are they not feeling it, though, for real? Or are there other issues that the president has politically where he could be attacked? In other words, how do you argue against this economy? Is it just a personality or whatever? All the arguments.
All of the above. I think some people
there's an argument against the economy. What is it?
Well, a lot of people don't have stock portfolios. If you do, you're probably feeling pretty good. If you're a wage and hour worker and you're seeing rising income inequality, or your health care costs are rising, those kitchen table issues are impacting you. And to your point, there are a whole host of other issues that people are judging this president on. So with this strong an economy, it's just remarkable that his approval rating is that low.
Let's keep that going a little bit. I'm going to get Eric in first before we come back to
Reagan was, roughly around the same numbers in terms of approval rating. You have to look at it through an electoral lens. Even Laura has trouble explaining what the messaging is going to be from the Democrats to say, hey, wait a second, the economy's booming. It's certainly great, but we still want to try to impeach this president, right? So I think that the messaging from the Democrats is really very vague right now, and I think you've seen that in the presidential debates, and you certainly saw it with Joe Biden the other day.
But the one thing Laura did say that is, we've talked about this a lot, that is a valid point, that another president with this economy would have higher numbers. I think that is fair, and you could argue why that's not the case. But what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, everybody is a mixed bag, but in terms of just economics alone, it does impact the average person. We're at record low unemployment rates.
That's the main point, rather than the stock market, right?
Yeah, that translates into dollar wages for the average American going up. And so, people are happy. People can go buy what they want at the store. American corporations are innovating like never before. We're not seeing this economic malaise that we saw 10 years ago.
All right, let's talk a little bit more. You brought up impeachment and all that's out there with the president, and certainly the economic wind, as we've been talking about, whether it's the stock market or jobs, would appear to be at his back. But he is out slamming the Democrats this week, saying impeachment may be holding him back a bit in terms of his ability to work with leaders abroad. He said as much on Twitter. Blake Burbett at the White House with the latest on all that. Blake.
Hi there, Connell. President Trump speaks with, engages with world leaders all the time. For example, we saw the latest even yesterday when he's down at Mar-a-Lago vacationing for the Christmas New Year's break. The White House says the president spoke with the Egyptian leader over the phone yesterday. That conversation came at the very same time, or at least on the same day, as the president made the claim on Twitter that impeachment is harming his dealings with world leaders. This was the tweet at one point from President Trump yesterday. He said, quote, "Despite all the great success that our country has had over the last 3 years, It makes it much more difficult to deal with foreign leaders and others when I am having to constantly defend myself against the do-nothing Democrats and their bogus impeachment scam. Bad for USA, the president writes. Now, while that might be true, we should also note that the president has been very vocal and very public in confronting some world leaders. For example, just a few weeks ago, at the NATO meetings in London, he called the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, quote, two-faced, after Trudeau could be seen the day before laughing with Emmanuel Macron and Boris Johnson about those mini press conferences that broke out when Trudeau and Macron met with the president in London. And then just yesterday, after the president had blamed impeachment for difficulty in dealing with foreign leaders, he threw out another Twitter jab at Trudeau, responding to the reports that his role in Home Alone 2 had been cut in a Canadian broadcast. The president tweeted the following. He said, quote, "I guess Justin T doesn't much like my making him pay up on NATO or trade." That was the response from the president. We should note that the CBC has said that the scene involving President Trump, then a private citizen, was cut in 2014. As far as these face-to-face interactions with the president and other world leaders, Connell, it'll probably be more restricted next year, or at least confined here to the White House. Maybe the president will head to Davos next month, but then we go to a campaign year, and normally foreign travel isn't as heavy in a year in which there's an election, of course, versus a year that there is not. And when you look just more widely at the broader agenda, next month, everything is sort of laid out for this administration. Trade one phase deal, expecting that possibly next month. The USMCA should be signed in the Senate, and then even broadening out after that. They kind of have the decks cleared here at the White House. Spending bill through September, not having to deal with the debt ceiling next year at all. But in an election year, you got to wonder what exactly could get done in this time.
I don't know, Blake. Sounds very simple. If it's all scheduled like that, there shouldn't be any bumps along the road. Everything will go smoothly. No arguments, of course. All right, sir,
we'll see how the year goes, right?
As always. We'll see what happens. Blake, thank you.
Exactly.
Blake Berman on the White House North Lawn, where things are quiet this week, and about the only week it is. Now, guys, the president's been talking about this impeachment push, as Blake says. As Blake also reports, I guess there are two sides to this, whether, it's good for the country, it's good for the president, it's bad for the president, it hurts America with other world leaders. Maybe his own words have hurt his relationship with world. I mean, I don't know. But the idea that impeachment is an impediment for the president to do his job. What do you make of that argument?
Well, I think he's absolutely correct. And I think he's a little bit frustrated. I think the reality is, he has a great record of success as president. If you just look at the substance of his policies and everything else that he's been putting forth. You got the economy, unemployment rate. So I think he's frustrated that this is undercutting his agenda and his policy prescriptions that he's put forth. And I think you see that as he lashes out on Justin Trudeau. I think that two-faced comment probably had a different connotation to it that he intended. Wow. But my point is I think that you're looking at a president that is frustrated by the way that the Democrats and even some in the media have perceived his administration, his many successes.
What about from the Democratic side? I think there is some risk, we've heard more and more talk about this, that as the needle doesn't move on impeachment from the public's point of view, that this move politically could backfire on Democrats, especially in swing states. If you look at the data in the key states that will decide the election, Laura, the numbers are not great from a Democratic point of view on impeachment. So you have to be some Democrats worried about how this is all being perceived, right?
Sure, but they're putting principle over politics. I mean, this was never about winning at the polls. It's not a winning issue. But I will say this, the polls are shifting. The obstructionism of Mitch McConnell is not allowing witnesses to testify in the Senate and kind of rigging it. That's a problem. And the American people are noticing that. 55%, the highest watermark ever. And more importantly...
Well, that was one poll that's always kind of been in favor. It's always been a poll, the one that you referenced, I believe, from yesterday or the day before, that's always been kind of leaning in that direction.
Fair enough. Yeah, the watermark is moving, but it's also the number of people that are moving from a don't impeach him to a hey, I'll think about it. And so those numbers, I mean, in fact, I can't believe that they're this good because, again, this wasn't a political move. So I think, we get through impeachment. Well, Democrats stand on principle and then they get back to bread and butter issues, which, as we talked about earlier, American people aren't feeling.
Motivation, and by definition, it's a political process. And that's what impeachment is. I mean, there's politics all over it, and both sides are kind of feeling it, I think. And though, who is, quote unquote, winning right now?
Well,
in terms of
I think it's actually backfiring against the Democrats, against Pelosi. Most Americans don't care. Sorry.
But what about this idea the president president brings up himself that, it's kind of tough to do my job.
Oh, I'm sure it's interfering with individual conversations he has with world leaders. But in terms of the average American, if you look at election betting odds, his probability has gone up since this whole impeachment thing, I think, of re-election, since this whole thing has happened, because I think Americans are like, this is obviously political. They have it out to get him, and we don't care. So I think it's actually maybe even helping him.
Well, to me, that's a state issue again, because if you think about where impeachment is popular, this state, New York, California, places where the president is unpopular, you'll get huge numbers in favor, Laura, of impeachment, right? But if you go,
independents are moving, and that on the national
in those states,
so some of them remains to be seen. But let's talk about this other issue.
Michigan, Wisconsin, states like that.
Totally fair, and those numbers need to be watched. But the bigger picture, we're talking about world leaders laughing at President Trump. Now, I don't think that certain people that may disagree with my politics, they don't mind the tough talk from Trump, but him getting laughed at by even people he considers his allies, like the Great Britain's leader, I mean, that's a problem for him. America does not like to be
Again, I don't know if it
at.
is in the states that I'm talking about. That would be my
Watch
question
those states,
about
though. Those people are not immune
definitely.
to the national trends.
Quick final point, Eric, then we're going to go.
The numbers are moving. You have to look at it through an electoral lens, and he is polling very well against all his Democratic counterparts. And it's not just the impeachment. People are watching the Democratic debates, and they're looking at it, and they're laughing. That's the laughing matter in all of this.
Well, he's polling, to push back a little bit on that, he's not polling great head-to-head against many of the Democratic candidates.
In the middle western states.
But in the states, your point is, he's doing better in those states.
We don't need to win California and New York.
Just hold on to that Wisconsin, and we'll bring it home.
That's all we need.
Well, that's what'll decide it. Again, I would think those three states, at least two of, you got to win 2 out of 3 at least of those: Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Anyway, we'll have all year to talk about that. All right, more politics. Senator Bernie Sanders, does he actually have a clearing path to the Democratic nomination? More talk about that this week, with insiders reportedly suggesting Senator Elizabeth Warren has been sliding in some of the key states, and Senator Sanders has been rising, and maybe that his health rebound and all kinds of things might be improving his chances in 2020 after a lot of people wrote him off. So we talk about it with the panel, and you can start us off on this. You look at Bernie Sanders. We all talked about him, covered him, and looked at it last time around as a key candidate, or a legit candidate, to be the nominee of the Democratic Party this time around. Could he do it?
Well, now that Warren has come up with so many specifics of her plan, I think it's just too socialist for most Americans to swallow.
So Warren's sliding.
Sanders, on the other hand, is talking in vagaries and saying, oh, we don't know, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But I still think he's also too socialist for the average American to get on behind. But if you compare him to all the other candidates, it's like the worst possible set of choices. And so he's one of the few people who are remaining.
The one thing about Bernie Sanders, Laura, that we did learn from 2016 is that he has the staying power to hang around. People write him off all the time, say, oh, he's going to drop out. He's not going to drop out. I mean, a heart attack this year. Apparently his health has improved, and he's able to go out and do these events, even at his age, has a lot of energy on the campaign trail. But he doesn't go away. He hangs around, and he hangs around. And now people in this Politico piece and other places are talking about him like he could actually take the nomination. What do you say?
Well, he's got a really strong base of support, which is important in a primary. And I know I got a couple swing voters here with my fellow panelists, but I will say that there's a wealth of options to choose from. Virtually every Democratic frontrunner, when going head-to-head with Trump, wins, whether you're talking about Elizabeth Warren or Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders. So it is a strong group of candidates, and all of them have their base. And so we're going to continue to see this movement in the polls over time. But Bernie Sanders' support is fixed, and it is strong.
His base
supporters love him.
Elizabeth Warren's base, and she seems to be fading. I mean, we even saw that in the stock market, I think, a little bit. People coming in, our guests, and telling us markets, it would be maybe up anyway, but the market liked the idea that she was fading. There was some worry maybe a month ago that she could be the nominee, worry about her policies. There, by the way, would be a similar worry about Bernie Sanders' policies, but so far Wall Street hasn't taken a President Sanders seriously, so we'll see.
I think he has a real shot. I think the difference between him and Elizabeth Warren is she's not authentic. She's come out and talked about whether it's college tuition and what she's getting paid and, of course, heritage, all that kind of stuff. She's found herself to be in more gaffes, kind of like Joe Biden has, and I think if you're looking looking at one socialist versus the other, he's got a real populist message out there. And if you've ever been to one of his events, I mean, he gets them out there. So I would not underestimate Bernie Sanders at the very least. And
but
I
as
think
someone who supports
he's going to come up.
The president, you support the president.
Yeah.
Sounds like you're rooting for Bernie Sanders.
Absolutely. I absolutely am. But I do.
Scared of Warren. I feel the fear.
No,
right
I don't think so. I think that there's a difference. I think Bernie Sanders brings a lot more to the table, and I think there's also a little bit of buyer's remorse of not electing him in 2016 when Hillary Clinton went on and lost to Donald Trump.
Now, the one thing it brings up again is that people see him hanging around. They see Mike Bloomberg with all this money that he's spending and say, maybe, I know this is more of I think a fantasy of pundits and reporters, maybe we actually get the brokered convention this time around.
It's possible. It all depends on who holds on. I mean, I think Bernie we saw him not wanting to drop out in 2016. We may see that again. I think it depends on who comes forward. But I do think I fundamentally disagree. Elizabeth Warren has proved to be resilient in this field, suffered some setbacks and came back swinging.
So you don't think she's done?
Absolutely not. No, she is extraordinary on the stump, and her life story coming from nothing in Oklahoma and making it big, her understanding of Wall Street. She's even got the former President Barack Obama stumping for her behind the scenes. This is not the mark of a fading candidate.
Allegedly, right. Quick
don't
final
be afraid
point.
of the lady boy.
They all have a strong following of people who don't understand basic economics, and that's the problem. The polls,
I think she's pretty good.
The election vetting odds showing her plummeting in probability of winning now that people see what she's about. She's against corporations. She's against the stock market. She's against Wall Street.
Well, she's against people that are billionaires that she wants to tax. And she's not even really against them. She just like them to pay a little bit more. And her messages, when you look at a Fox News poll, resonate with the American people. Give her a little more lead time. She's going to be, the focus is going to be less on the president, more on the field of Democrats, for better or worse. And we're going to see her shine.
We got to run, but whether she's against them or not, they're against her, and that's also a big part of the story from our perspective covering markets and the like. Right, but well, that's interesting. We'll see, because you're right. Many of them are in the states that are probably going one way or the other, but in the primaries they have a lot of money to spend. That's for sure. Anyway. A break. And then I do want to make a quick point about this lawsuit we mentioned last hour, the class action one fired over the security camera hacks, the Ring cameras. The lawsuit claims Ring and Amazon refused to take any responsibility for the breaches. I mentioned that we reached out to Amazon. We reached out to Ring as well, and a spokesperson now did get back to us. All they said was that they do not comment on legal matters. So we did want to pass that along after doing the story last hour. We'll be right back. What's your response, before I let you go, to people who do say, whether it's on Instagram or somewhere else, that, you know what, it is sexist, that this kind of thing? What's your response to them?
I find that so intriguing and so interesting, and I want to hear more because I don't see that point of view. I don't see it being sexist at all. The whole advertisement, when you watch it, there's no hints that it is sexist. It was not in the script at all. So I wonder why people view it that way. For me, it is curiosity. I just want to know, and if there is a good point where maybe it could be deemed as sexist, I would like to hear that point of view. So that's what I want to know.
That was Sean Hunter last hour. He's the actor who played the Peloton husband. He joined us explaining why he actually bought his real-life girlfriend one of the bikes, and he doesn't, as you heard, see the whole thing as sexist, as some had said. That's why it became a controversy to begin with. Edward Stringham, Laura Fink, Eric Beach, our panel, all back with us. Do you want to take this first, Laura, on the idea of, but he, you know, the allegations, what you've made of the whole controversry, and this idea the guy bought it for his own girlfriend?
I mean, I think we need to have full disclosure. The man was paid in Pelotons, gave one to his girlfriend, gave one to his mother, gave one to his 94-year-old grandmother. He's just dealing out.
Here I asked, so that's funny what you mentioned, because that was what I thought. I was like, if I came home with a Neal Cavuto mug and gave it to my wife, she'd be like, come on, you better have bought me a real present. Exactly. But no, he claims, he swears that he paid full price for the Peloton.
Residuals of Pelotons.
Well,
you'll be getting a Peloton.
Paid for it with the money from the commercial, but he claims it wasn't like he got a freebie here. But anyway.
Fair enough. But I do think, look, as the only woman on this panel, and I've experienced some sexism in my day. The problem was with the tone. I mean, the tone was, what is the next ad going to be? Is she going to be chained to the Peloton? Is it hostage Peloton?
So you did have an issue with it.
I mean, I wouldn't say, it was just a tone-deaf ad. It was like a 1950s retro, but that said, I will tell you, it was a great PR move, or ended up being. They've recovered so nicely. And as a comms person, I watch, we're still on TV talking about Peloton.
Yes.
Now, the stock, I don't know if you've seen the stock, has not recovered in the same way. But in terms of turning bad PR into good, bonus and props to Peloton.
Down 24% this month. Impressions of this whole deal?
I mean, clearly, everybody wants to have a Peloton for Christmas, and we just need to have the next version of the commercial showing that. I don't know why they're beating up on this company for advertising their own product. Hey, this is actually useful for people.
I mean, I'm sure, I don't have a Peloton personally. I'm sure it's a good product that by all accounts it is. It's expensive though, which is maybe more of the issue than whether or not the ad was sexist.
Do they say this about the car commercial where there's a big bow on the car and you're going to get this for Christmas? That's $50,000. It's only $2,000 for a great bicycle.
Not a bad point. You buy a Peloton for anybody this Christmas?
No, but my wife is a pretty big spin instructor. Okay. So I'm kind of already a spin husband, not a Peloton husband.
Fair enough.
But I would like to get a Neal Cavuto mug if you have one.
Yeah, right.
I would appreciate that a lot more.
Somebody's got one in the back.
Yeah, someone's got. I'll go steal one.
You do have to pay full price for it.
Yeah, look, I do agree with Laura. I think the ad was a little tone deaf. I think they try to adjust to it, and I'm not sure how good a PR is if their sales are down, right? So it was even worth doing in that regard. So,
I don't know.
So we'll see what happens with it.
Want to talk about the movies for a few minutes? Yeah, we will see what happens with it. I really don't know if it's good PR or not. One of those situations where any publicity is good publicity. Anyway, at the movies this year, we close out 2019, and some people are starting to get worried about these box office numbers. You see on the screen overall down almost 4% and estimated to fall about 4% when all the numbers come in. And one of the things I noticed, Laura, about all this is that it was a big year for certain movies, right? And when they looked at like the top 10 movies, they killed it. But if you weren't making a top 10 movie, then you were out of luck. So it tells me that, we have to really be convinced nowadays to go out and see something. We're not going to just go see any old movie. But what do you think?
No, it's true. And those are all franchise films, which also, some of the less creative. I mean, how many of the versions of one movie can we see? A lot. That's where the bankable money is. And we're going to continue to see that shift. It's a little bit disappointing. And they're trying to make the theater experience more interesting. But the advent and the diversity we see on the streaming services is great in one way because we're hearing a lot of voices and seeing a lot of films that wouldn't otherwise be made. The downside of that is we're not getting out into the theater and rubbing elbows.
And I get it. I mean, to your point, you put a recliner in the theater. I mean, that's great. It's comfy and the whole thing. But it's got to be a movie that it's got a lot of buzz. You got to want to see it. You have to be motivated.
That's right. I mean, movies are more expensive and they're less creative these days, right? I mean, Laura's absolutely right. You got the big blockbuster films or the top 10 films, and how many times can you kill Thor? I don't know. I mean, he keeps coming back, but the reality is that the movies have become less unique. I'm 30 minutes away from Hollywood, and I wish they'd get a little bit more creative like they used to.
Right. Now, Ed's going to say this is not true. He just went out to see Cats. He was one of the few that liked it. Is that right? You said you were telling us?
Yeah, Batman versus Superman number 32 and Cats are my favorite ones this year. I'm surprised why they're not getting as much sales as people predicted.
Well, we're all going out later to see Bombshell, so that's all happening.
Well, I don't know about that. This is, but again, the top 10 thing was what stood out to me about all this. Now, if you want to talk about a movie that actually has been in the news the last couple of days, how about the Home Alone 2 thing? So does anybody have a thought on that? And for those who don't know, Home Alone 2, of course, was a movie that was made years ago, and President Trump, when he was a private citizen, had this little small role in it, cameo, I guess. And then it became a big issue earlier in the week because, they aired it up in Canada, and that particular scene was edited out. Now, apparently it was edited out years ago, like before he became president, which maybe was not known when the story got to the news. But President Trump went out, and I think he was having a little bit of fun with it. He talked about it on Twitter. Let's listen to the president also speaking about it, then we'll come back and talk about it. Here he is. We're going to listen, We're going to listen to the scene from Home Alone.
Down the hall and to the left.
Thanks.
So I say, there's the tweet I was referring to. The movie will never be the same. And then, just kidding. So how could you cut that scene out, right, to save time?
And by the way, it was Oscar-worthy scene.
Right, exactly.
Easily the best scene in the entire movie. And I agree with the president. They should have put it back in there. And who else is going to tell Kevin where to find the lobby?
But I think one of the things, though, is that we did get all worked up about this, both sides politically. And again, I think he was just joking. I don't think he really cares. Said he was cut out of home, but maybe. I don't know.
I don't know. CBC, I mean, you call Justin Trudeau two-faced. You've got to watch your back.
I mean,
both of them are very pretty faces, so we should just Note that.
I wonder one of the things, I mean, this maybe not even be a serious comment either, but if you're looking at President Trump in general, that maybe he'd be better off kind of being lighthearted with some of this stuff sometimes, whether it's criticism or something like this.
We need to
making
have
a few jokes,
more
you know?
presidents in Home Alone 2. That's really the solution.
I don't remember, I got to be honest, I remember Home Alone. I don't remember Home Alone 2. Was it a terrible sequel? It probably was. No offense to President Trump or anybody, there he is, who was in it. Does anybody remember Home Alone 2?
It was a blockbuster because it was a franchise film. It actually was one of the best sequels and highest grossing sequels.
Oh, in money-wise, was it?
Money-wise, yeah, it was a huge winner, and nobody seems to miss the president in the scene. I mean, he had to tweet about it to get us to even remember.
Yeah. Well, Home Alone, the first movie, was funny. So anyway, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Have a great new year. Eric